The day she filed for divorce, she smiled at me across the breakfast table. That's the part people never believe when I tell it. She poured herself a cup of coffee, sat down, looked at me and smiled. Not the kind of smile you give someone you love, the kind you give someone you've already decided to bury. I smiled back. Because I had been waiting for that exact smile for 23 months, my name doesn't matter. What matters is this: I built something from nothing. A real estate holding company that by the time she filed those papers was worth close to $90 million. I built it before I met her. I built it during our marriage. I built it in the mornings before she woke up and in the evenings after she went to sleep, and she always knew, she had always known, that if this marriage ended, she would walk away with half. That was the law, that was her plan. And for a long time, I let her believe it was mine too. She had a lawyer. Of course she did. His name was Raymond Castell, the best matrimonial attorney in the state. Aggressive, meticulous, feared in courtrooms, the kind of man other lawyers spoke about with a particular mixture of professional respect and quiet dread. She had hired him 8 months before she filed the papers. I know this because I have a habit of knowing things before I'm supposed to. She thought she was being careful. She thought she had been discreet. She had met with Raymond in a different part of the city, on the opposite side of town, in a building where none of our mutual connections had offices. She paid his retainer in cash from an account she had opened quietly under her sister's name. Smart, patient. She had thought this through. But here is the thing about being the kind of man I am. I don't react to information. I collect it. And then I decide, quietly, without urgency, exactly what to do with it. I found out about Raymond on a Tuesday. I remember the day clearly because I had a board meeting that morning and I sat through the entire 3-hour session without saying a single unnecessary word, watching the room the way I always watch rooms. Not for what people say, but for what they don't. I drove home that evening, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, sat down in the dark office on the 3rd floor, and I began to plan. Not the beginning of a plan, the continuation of one, because I had suspected this was coming long before she ever dialed Raymond's number. I had suspected it for nearly 2 years. The distance between us had changed in quality. Not louder, not more dramatic. Quieter, actually. The conversations that stopped mid-sentence. The way she looked at me across rooms, not with contempt, but with the particular patient calculation of someone who is measuring what they stand to gain. Someone who has already started adding up the numbers before the negotiation even starts. I am not a man who mistakes instinct for paranoia. I felt it clearly, and so I acted on it. Quietly, methodically. With the patience of someone who understands that the right move made too early is just as dangerous as no move at all. Panic leaves evidence. Urgency leaves fingerprints. I had no interest in either. 23 months before she filed, I began restructuring. Not dramatically. Nothing that would leave a visible mark on the surface of our life together. No sudden transfers, no suspicious wire movements, no late-night phone calls made in rooms with closed doors. Just a slow, deliberate repositioning of assets, the kind that looks from the outside like ordinary business decisions made by a man who is always thinking several steps ahead. Because that is exactly what it was. The first thing I moved was the Harrington portfolio. 42 commercial properties spread across 6 states, assembled over 11 years. I restructured them under a new holding entity, legally, cleanly, with documentation that had been prepared by attorneys who were not Raymond Castell and who did not know my wife's name or her face. That entity was controlled by a trust. The trust had a trustee. The trustee was not me. On paper, it was not me. I need you to understand something before we go further. Everything I did was legal, entirely, completely, defensibly legal. I am not telling you a story about fraud. I am not telling you a story about crimes committed in dark rooms. I am telling you a story about time, about the fundamental, irreducible difference between a man who reacts to a threat and a man who sees it coming so far in advance that by the time the threat arrives, he has already rewritten the terrain it was supposed to cross. She came to that table with a plan she had been building for 8 months. I came to that table with a plan I had been building for 23. That is not a legal strategy. That is a different understanding of how the world works. The second restructuring involved the development fund, $61 million in managed capital running through 4 separate investment vehicles. I consolidated, divested, and reorganized. By the time she hired Raymond, the fund's structure had changed 3 separate times. 3 legitimate, fully documented reorganizations, nothing unusual for a business of our size, nothing that would draw attention from anyone who didn't already know exactly what they were looking for and exactly what they expected to find. My attorney had reviewed every step. Nothing rushed, nothing suspicious. Every date correct, every signature properly notarized, every filing properly recorded and stamped and indistinguishable from the ordinary course of business. She didn't notice any of it. She wasn't supposed to. My life with her, the dinners, the weekends, the occasional vacation to places she chose and I agreed to without complaint, continued exactly as it had before. I made no mistakes in her presence. I gave her nothing to see. I gave her the version of me she had always known, controlled, somewhat distant, predictably occupied with the demanding, relentless work of running a large business. I was consistent. Consistency is the most powerful disguise there is because no one suspects a man who appears to be exactly the same person he has always been. The third move was the one she would have been most furious about if she had ever understood the sequence of it. In the 15 months before she filed, I acquired 3 additional properties using capital that by that point sat entirely outside the marital estate. Properties worth combined just under $14 million. She had no legal claim to any of them. Not because I concealed them, they were publicly recorded transactions, but because the entity that purchased them had been established before those assets had any legal connection to our marriage in any sense that the court would recognize. Timing. In my world, everything comes down to timing. She filed on a Thursday morning. My own attorney, not Raymond, and engaged for 22 months by that point, called me before noon. I listened to his summary. I asked 3 questions. I thanked him and ended the call. I drove to the office. I had lunch at my desk, alone, watching the city from behind the glass. I reviewed 2 contracts. I made 3 phone calls, none of them about the divorce. I drove home at 7, cooked a simple dinner, and when she came downstairs at 8 with her overnight bag and told me she would be staying at her sister's indefinitely, I nodded. I told her to take care of herself. I told her to drive safely. She paused at the door. She stood there for just a moment longer than she needed to. I think she was expecting something. Anger, perhaps, or the kind of cold, dangerous silence that finally cracks open. Panic from a man who suddenly understood that everything he had built was about to be divided in half by a judge who didn't care about the years it had taken to build it. She wanted to see me unravel. That would have told her something important. That she still had power over me. That the timing of her move had found me unprepared. I picked up the book I had been reading. She left. The discovery process began 2 weeks later. Raymond was thorough, I will give him that. He subpoenaed everything. Bank records going back 7 years, corporate filings across all entities, tax returns, business valuations from 3 different firms. He brought in 2 forensic accountants, both of them well regarded in their field. He was doing the precise, meticulous work of a man who believed he was about to locate $90 million in divisible marital assets. The kind of case that makes careers and gets written up in the journals that matrimonial attorneys read. He found approximately 11 million. The rest had been moved, restructured, reorganized, or acquired under entities that predated or fell entirely outside the scope of marital property under the applicable law. All of it defensible, all of it documented, all of it dated and notarized and filed exactly as my attorneys had spent 22 months preparing it to be. Raymond was looking for a body. He found a room that had been quietly, professionally, and completely cleaned before he ever arrived. I sat across from Raymond in a conference room 6 weeks after she filed. He was good. Genuinely good. He looked at me with the particular controlled fury that very expensive attorneys develop after they realize they have walked into a situation that is fundamentally different from what their client described to them. He didn't shout. He didn't make threats he couldn't support. He asked precise questions in a precise order and received precise answers. He tried 3 different legal angles in that single session: constructive fraud, fraudulent transfer, alter ego theory, and each time my attorney responded with documentation that had been prepared specifically to address that argument. Each time the filing dates held. Each time the legal logic held. I watched Raymond work. I watched the way his jaw tightened slightly when the third angle produced nothing useful. The way he paused before the next question, recalibrating, reassessing, returning to the file as though something in it might be different the second time he looked. He was excellent at what he did. Under different circumstances, I might have found it genuinely interesting to watch. She was not in the room that day. Raymond was managing her expectations in private, the way good attorneys do when the case begins to reveal itself as something materially different from what the client imagined it was going to be. I have thought about what those conversations must have looked like. The careful language Raymond would have used, the way he would have framed the revisions. The moment when she understood for the first time that the 90 million she had been counting on was not where she had expected to find it. She contested for 7 months. Raymond hired 3 additional experts. He challenged the timing of the trust formation, arguing it had been created specifically in anticipation of litigation and therefore should be unwound. He challenged the valuation methodology on the development fund. He argued that the totality of the restructuring constituted a deliberate scheme to deprive her of assets she was legally entitled to receive. My attorneys had anticipated every argument. Because I had told them 22 months earlier, seated in the 3rd floor office with a glass of bourbon, to anticipate every argument that a smart, aggressive matrimonial attorney would make. Every counterpoint had documentation behind it. Every document had a date behind it. Every date had been established and recorded long before any of this became litigation. The judge issued his findings. They were correct, and they were final. She settled in the 9th month. She received the 11 million in clearly established marital assets, which was, to within a small margin, exactly what I had calculated she would receive when I first sat down and began this particular exercise in patience and preparation. She received the apartment in the city. She received 2 jointly held accounts. She received a car and several other positions that had been held in both names throughout the marriage. She did not receive the Harrington portfolio. She did not receive the development fund. She did not receive the 14 million in late acquisitions. She did not receive the other positions I have not described here and will not describe. She believed she took half. She took exactly what I calculated 23 months in advance that she would be permitted to take. I want to be precise about something because I think precision matters in a story like this. I am not telling you this to make her the villain. She made a decision. She executed it carefully with planning and patience and a very capable attorney. Against a different kind of man, it might have worked completely. She might have walked away with $45 million and spent the rest of her life believing she had won something that was rightfully hers. And in a different version of this story, with a different man sitting across that breakfast table, she would have been right. But she made one mistake. The same mistake almost every person makes when they decide to move against me. She confused my silence for unawareness. She looked at a man who came home quiet and worked long hours and sat at dinner without extensive conversation, and she concluded that this was a man who could be managed, someone distracted by ambition and ego, someone who could be outflanked by a well-timed filing and a powerful attorney because men like me, she had decided, rely on force and presence rather than preparation, and when the legal process strips away those things, we are left with nothing. She didn't see the third-floor office at 11 o'clock on a winter night, lit by a single lamp with documents spread across the desk and a call running to a tax attorney in a different time zone. She didn't see the drives that were not ordinary commutes, the conversations held at low volume in a moving car, the meetings in other cities that fit seamlessly into the existing pattern of my professional life because I made sure they would. She didn't see 23 months of quiet, deliberate, entirely unremarkable preparation because I built it to be unremarkable. I built it to look like nothing. She saw what I allowed her to see. That is the only discipline I have ever truly committed to in my life. Not the accumulation of assets, not the business itself, not the strategy, though I am not bad at strategy. The stillness. The ability to sit across from someone who is planning your financial destruction. To look at them across a breakfast table, to pour coffee and hold ordinary conversation and drive to ordinary meetings, and give them absolutely nothing. No change in behavior, no tells, no urgency leaking through the surface of an ordinary Tuesday. To let them believe the momentum of their plan is unstoppable, and then to simply not be in the position they expected when they arrive to collect. There is something I have never told anyone about those 23 months. Not my attorneys. Not the people who work closely enough to me that they might have noticed something. There were nights, not many, but some, when I sat in that third-floor office and felt the full weight of what I was doing. Not guilt. I want to be accurate here. Not guilt exactly. More like a recognition of the distance between what a marriage is supposed to be and what ours had become. Two people, each quietly building a case against the other, each moving pieces across a board the other couldn't see. I wondered on those nights whether she felt that same weight, whether she sat in rooms I didn't know about and felt the strangeness of it. Two people sharing a house, sharing meals, sharing the ordinary surface of a life, while underneath it, in the parts that don't show, each of us was already somewhere else entirely. I don't say this to make the story softer than it is. I say it because I think it's the truest part of it. The money was always just the arena. The real thing happening, the thing that actually took 23 months, was something more precise than financial restructuring. It was the decision made quietly and without drama to see things as they were rather than as I had once hoped they might be. That decision once made doesn't feel like loss, it feels like clarity. And clarity, in my experience, is the most valuable asset a man can hold. There is a particular quality to that satisfaction. It is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly in a conference room when a very expensive attorney opens a set of documents and understands, without being told, without anything dramatic being said, that the calculation he came here to run is not going to produce the number his client was promised. The morning the settlement was signed, I had breakfast alone. Coffee, toast, the newspaper. I drove to the office. I sat through a board meeting that afternoon. I had dinner with an associate at 7. It was a day identical in its structure to most of my days. Organized, deliberate, and unremarkable to anyone watching from the outside. She has the apartment. She has $11 million. and she has the absolute, unshakable conviction that I wronged her, that I cheated her out of what the law entitled her to receive. That story probably gives her something real to hold on to, and I have no need to take it from her. People are entitled to the stories that get them through. But I know what happened in those 23 months. I know what it cost, not in money, but in patience, in the discipline of appearing to be one thing while being entirely something else.